All ready to go? All right. Want to thank everybody for coming tonight to the ANS or AIS, Aquatic Invasive Species Public Information Prevention Meeting. My name is Jeff Frith. I'm the chairman of the Ramsey County Commission. With us tonight, we have Ben Holland from North Dakota Game and Fish. He's our ANS coordinator for the state. He's brought with him Grant Capone. Grant is an ANS biologist. We have with us, I'd like to welcome Senator Dave Elke, District 15. Other representatives here in attendance, Rob, and I'm sorry, Graywater. Rob is with the Spirit Lake Nation Fish and Wildlife. Yes, so Rob, I want to thank you for coming. Adam Lightmon, another Ramsey County Commissioner, is here. I want to thank you for attending. And Mike Grafsgaard representing the City of Devils Lake, City Engineer. Kyle Blanchfield with Garrison Conservancy District. Ed Dosh is with Lake Region Anglers. Rich Breckner, he's kind of organized this meeting or asked us to host it anyway. Rich is with the North Dakota Sports Fishing Congress. Susie Kennett, Director of Devils Lake Tourism, and Commissioner Ed Brown. So if there's any of you that I left out, I apologize for that. Steve Moe, I want to thank you for attending. Steve is our GIS IT coordinator for Ramsey County, and he is going to be broadcasting this meeting live on YouTube, so everybody else out in the internet world can watch us live. So with that, we will turn things over to Ben. We'll learn more about aquatic nuisance and the potential hazards that we have out there, and some of the prevention measures that North Dakota Game and Fish is taking, and then what we can do as individuals, as community members, take in our own communities. So thank you all for attending.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Everyone hear me? Like Jeff mentioned, tonight I'm just going to talk about the current status of ANS in North Dakota, talk about some prevention strategies that we have on Devil's Lake, and what kind of aquatic nuisance species that we got to look for on the horizon or in the future that could cause problems to the resource that's important to a lot of people. So I don't have to remind anyone here, you know, Devil's Lake, it's really a recreation paradise for a lot of the people in the Midwest. You know, it's a top angling destination. It contributes a lot to waterfowl hunter success in the areas, and overall it supports very healthy fish and wildlife populations. And with those, the hunter and angler dollars that come into the region, it's very, very crucial to the local economy. Brings in, you know, millions of dollars every year to the local region. And for many in North Dakota, it's a cultural staple. You know, if I'm in Southwest North Dakota or I'm in Southeast North Dakota, we all talk to each other and say, you know, have you been up to Devil's Lake this year fishing? It's just a way of life for us in North Dakota. Lots of people make the trip every year to Devil's Lake. Lots of people make the trip from all over the Midwest. So what's a threat to this resource that, you know, the community holds dear, that us anglers hold dear? They're aquatic nuisance species. And by now, I hope everyone in this room knows what aquatic nuisance species are. They're non-native plants, animals, or pathogens outside their native range that threaten native species, the ecological stability of the area, commercial or recreational activities. So far, the good news in North Dakota, we're very fortunate. We're limited on the number of aquatic nuisance species that we have. And within North Dakota, we're very limited on their range. To date, you know, there have been no ANS detections in Devil's Lake, and that's pretty remarkable considering the amount of traffic and it gets into our region. Currently, North Dakota is limited to 8 aquatic nuisance species, but you don't have to go far over our borders, more than 50 to 100 miles, and you're going to find a heck of a lot more. If you travel even farther into the Great Lakes region, you can see up there that number is constantly rising every year. So we live in a very interconnected world where ships and ballast tanks and people are traveling more and more, and with that, people spread more and more species every year. Natural flooding events and things like that can also contribute to species ending up in new locations. So I'm quickly just going to run through some of the species that are out there and that we can expect kind of on our horizon, and hopefully that we can keep out of Devil's Lake. One right now that's probably our most widespread species in North Dakota, besides common carp, is curly pondweed, often carried on recreational or commercial equipment. It outcompetes native vegetation. It's often one of the first vegetations to sprout up in the springtime. It impedes recreation. Large die-offs of curly leaf pondweed can consume oxygen in the water column by bacteria. That consumption of oxygen can lead to fish kills. And this year in 2021, it was a very, very bad year for curly leaf pondweed on the Missouri River system. This was taken at Misty Waters here. You can see that that boat ramp is pretty much not usable in that location. I received reports all throughout the summer that the curly leaf pondweed in marinas is going through the roof this year. So a lot of these marinas, they're having to spend, $30,000 plus on weed harvesters to clean out marinas next year and try to deal with this problem year after year. So it's something that once it's in that location, it's not going to go away. You can either use manual techniques like weed harvesters and or chemical techniques, and lots of people don't like putting chemicals into open water like the Missouri River system and other locations. Another one that is dealt with quite extensively in Minnesota is Eurasian water milfoil. Eurasian water milfoil, it's transported by individual fragments. You put a boat in or a launch in, you move to the next water body, and if you have any little individual fragment of that Eurasian water milfoil, you come off your boat and start a whole new population of plants from there. So only takes a little bit of a fragment, often moved around in recreation equipment and aquariums. And same thing as curly pondweed, it outcompetes native vegetation, causes fish kills, and impedes recreational activities. There are areas like this that you can see here in the bay in Minnesota, that the entire bay is just blanketed with Eurasian water milfoil. You can't fish through that, you can't boat through that. Kids aren't going to swim in that. That's a drowning hazard too. So there's just, recreation in that location just isn't going to happen. Another one that's new to North Dakota for the first time, we documented in 2020, and then a couple more locations here is flowering rush. You can see these pretty flowers here, these white and pink flowers. They're often used in water gardens, and that's probably how they originally spread to the United States. People use this kind of stuff in landscaping equipment along ponds and stuff like that, and since then, they have unfortunately escaped into new areas. So it only takes a little piece of a rhizome or anything from that piece of flowering rush to form a whole new population of plants. They break off that rhizome, plants new plants, and plants start to grow. Impacts and impedes water movement. So there's lots of areas in the western United States that really wage war on flowering rush. Flowering rush will get into canals, stop up water movement. Millions of dollars every year are spent on flowering rush control and removal from water systems. They battle it quite extensively in the Columbia River drainage. And you can see it can really restrict shoreline access and outcompete native vegetation. So, I'm an avid shore fisherman. I enjoy shore fishing very much so. And you can see if you got 15 yards of flowering rush in front of your access, you're not casting out in front of anything like that. The shore accessing in some areas along the Columbia that have been good, are just no longer fishable for shore anymore. Another one that, the DNR in Minnesota, it's one of their poster childs besides zebra mussels right now, is stonewall. It's an invasive algae. And stonewall forms very dense mats that covers the lake bottom, and to the point where they can start protruding up above the water. They really can degrade fish and wildlife habitat. That stonewall will carpet the entire lake bottom, lock up nutrients that's available to fish species. They'll cover up the lake bottom, and you can see like here, if there are bluegill and bass beds at one time, they're not going to be there this year because they're completely covered up by stonewort. So spawning can be affected by stonewort, and just like these other plant species, and really impede recreation. So now we're going to get into some of the animals that are out there. There's another one 50 miles within our border. We have both Chinese and banded mystery snails. They were originally brought to the United States by aquarium releases and things like that. But now they're commonly spread out by recreational equipment, pet trade. These are very large snails, so it's be quite apparent if you saw them in Devil's Lake, because you'd be getting snails 3-4 inches big. They often have big spawning events where there'll be, thousands of snails within the lake. They have some kind of large die-off, and all the snails will get washed ashore, carpet the shorelines with smelly, rotten snails that are dying off. And so those snails will also carry parasites that mainly affect birds, but have, I think, over in Asia, have been known to affect humans. Another one that's unfortunately not too far from the North Dakota border is rusty crayfish, commonly moved as bait. Rusty crayfish were actually native here to the Ohio River Basin. Unfortunately, people have been spreading around through bait for the last 50 years. These guys are much more aggressive than our native crayfish here in North Dakota. They can quickly overpopulate an area. They'll drive other crayfish out of the area. They'll lower the aquatic invertebrate communities. Those invertebrate communities are very crucial to our fish growth, especially the younger year. And Grant and I were talking about it. If you go to areas in Minnesota and you're even pulling crankbaits, you'll have rusty crayfish grabbing onto crankbaits and grabbing onto lindy rigs. And if you're using live bait and pulling on the bottom, you lose probably twice as much bait as you normally would, because these guys are actively attacking your hook, where most crayfish are native crayfish. They see that crankbait running through and it runs right by them, they're scooting back. These guys are just clamping right on. So they're very, very aggressive, and their effects have shown to, even increase turbidity, destroy wildlife habitat, destroy aquatic vegetation too. Here's another one that's probably the closest one to Devil's Lake at this time. We have some natural barriers in place at Loma and Rock Lake to keep out common carp from the Devil's Lake Basin. Common carp, unfortunately, they were stocked here 100 to 120 years ago by our forefathers in fisheries management, and we've been trying to undo the mistakes from them. But common carp, they're very, very destructive fish. They destroy habitat, can quickly outcompete and become the dominant biomass in lakes. They increase eutrophication, their feeding methods. They'll be uprooting vegetation, stirring up sediment, causing that lake that we all use to get more green out there. And they compete with native species for fish. And they're, if anyone's caught a carp, they're very, very hardy fish that, unfortunately, are hard to remove from areas. Another one that is probably one of the most poster child ones that you'll see on the news is invasive carp right here, our silver carp. These are the ones on the Missouri, Illinois, Ohio River drainages that are now just overpopulated and running those areas. We actually have silver carp in James River in North Dakota in very, very low densities, but they're commonly spread through bait, aquaculture, and natural events. And they are just tremendous, tremendous filter feeders, where they have the ability to completely deplete zooplankton communities. That zooplankton is really crucial for other fish that feed on zooplankton, like paddlefish. It's also crucial for their survival and growth of our young of the year walleye, perch, and all those other fish species that need that zooplankton, so they can grow that first year and start feeding on invertebrates and then start feeding on fish. So in many communities on the Missouri River, where they had 70, 80, or I should say 20 different species in there, it kind of flip-flops, and they'll see carp as their dominant biomass, 90% of the biomass now, and then find a few other species. So fish assemblages really have the capacity to change when carp are introduced to these areas. And you can see here's a picture of a paddlefish on the same river drainage before and after carp introduction, or before and after silver carp introductions. And you can see the health and quality of that fish that depends on zooplankton go drastically down. And that's a common theme seen through lots of areas where carp populations are very large in the Missouri and the Mississippi River basins. Another one similar to zebra mussels in that they have free-floating veligers is golden clams. Golden clams are actually very, very well established throughout much of the United States. And these guys were brought over and as more in the oriental trade, but since then they've been moved by bait releases, aquaculture, some intentional because they have been used as a food source. And just like zebra mussels, they have veligers, which can be in residual water, so they can be carried on recreational equipment. They look very similar to our native pill clams, and just like zebra mussels, they have a tremendous filter feeding ability, where they're taking a lot of that nutrients from the top water column in the forms of algae, depositing them in the lower sediments, locking up a lot of that nutrients. Just like zebra mussels, they're biofouls, so they have those free-floating veligers, and they can settle off in pipes and canals and water intakes and things like that. They're not actively attaching to substrate like zebra mussels, but they'll settle up and pile up over time in that water infrastructure. So we're getting to, the hot topic one that many of you guys is probably the most widely recognized one here in the United States at this time, is zebra mussels. These pictures are taken from North Dakota, so these are zebra mussel populations that are already established here in North Dakota. And you can see this settlement sampler right here was put out for 7 months in Lake Ashtabula at Sunstone's Landing. And in just 7 months' time, we have, an inch, 2 inches thick of zebra mussels hanging off these settlement samplers. And right now, if you went to, any rock on the dam at Lake Ashtabula, you're going to find probably, drop a camera down, you're going to find 2 inches thick covering every single rock on the dam. Here's our water intake for our Bald Hill National Dam fish hatchery. And we dropped the camera down this year, and you can see mussels are covering that water intake to the point where, this was our only location where we could find a little bit of original grading material on that water intake. So we're going to have to, over these probably next year, work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, call and dive team, blast out zebra mussels through lines, get this equipment down that's 10, 15 feet in the water that we're still trying to figure out how we're going to get to it, whether we're going to pull it up or have divers clean it or those options, but they're not cheap and they're costly options. So it's just the facts of life. When you get zebra mussels into a system, you're going to be spending money to mitigate those effects. So I'm just going to quickly talk about some of the life stages with zebra mussels. We recognize 3 different stages here in zebra mussels: veligers, settlers, and adults. Zebra mussels are broadcast spawners. So one zebra mussel female can reproduce up to 1 million eggs up in a year. That zebra mussel female will broadcast spawn. Males will release gametes. They'll create a fertilized egg. After about a day, that egg becomes a veliger, which many of you guys know about. That veliger will free float in the water column from 2 to 3 weeks. After that time period, that veliger will look to settle out on hard substrates. They like to settle out on mainly hard substrates, organic material. They love PVC, they love metal. They'll hook on vegetation. If you go on Ashtabula in the summertime and take up vegetation from there, put it under the microscope, you're going to see zebra mussels lining that vegetation on that aquatic vegetation. And from there, it only takes about a year time after that zebra mussel settles out to where it reaches the size and maturity where it can start reproducing again. So They quickly reproduce, settle out, and become adults and mature and reproduce quickly, and that's why you can see just the biodensities go through the roof on a lot of that substrate. So here's another picture from Lake Ashtabula. Here's a buoy that you can see in the distance from 30 yards. You could just see black coming up and down. Over time, this stuff was pulled off, and it stinks on the shorelines. Docks and lifts are coming off, and people are saying, man, this stuff over time, it smells atrocious in those areas too. So some invasive characteristics of zebra mussels, they're extremely prolific. Just like I said, one female up to 1 million eggs in a year. They attach via bisel threads. None of our other native mussel species can actively attach to substrates. So if you're out there fishing and you notice a mussel on your watercraft, it's probably a problem, and you probably should report it. It's part of the reason why every time you get off the water body, you should be doing the same thing as any North Dakota Game and Fish inspector would be. Quickly, once around your boat, make sure all the vegetation's clear, look for mussels, and thoroughly drain your boat to make sure that it's not carrying any villagers or pathogens that you could be spreading to other areas. And I kind of mentioned that they're tremendous filter feeders. Adult zebra mussel, one adult zebra mussel can filter feed up to a liter of water a day. And that doesn't sound like that much, but when you have, in some lakes, honestly, trillions of zebra mussels in that water body, they can quickly, within some water bodies, filter the entire volume of a lake in a day. So that's pretty miraculous. They're taking a lot of that nutrients top water column, putting it in the bottom. In North Dakota, we're not short for nutrients here, which is good because in a lot of our fisheries, guys, it grows fish quickly. We're growing 20-inch walleye in a lot of lakes in 4 years time, which doesn't happen in a lot of other locations. But that nutrients goes somewhere. So when they're using up that nutrients in the top water column, be put in the bottom water column, increase light clarity. We'll hit there. There's more nutrients. We have shallow water. It can really stir through vegetation growth. So now, instead of fishing weed lines at 3 feet, you're fishing them in 15, 20, and you can't find deep enough water because that weed line keeps extending and extending. It makes fishing difficult in areas. That filter feeding ability for our fish species, you never know how it's going to affect the species. For some species, that nutrients in that bottom water bottom sediment might be good. It might actually increase fish growth in some species, but you don't exactly know every lake how it's going to affect it. In Minnesota, the DNR has done some studies on zebra mussel introductions and found that perch and walleye growth after introductions of zebra mussels and with spiny water flea, that growth actually goes down with those fish. And the bad news with these mussels too is they can persist out of the water for a long period of time. Under perfect conditions, if this mussel actively attaches to a boat, it's in a cool, wet condition, it's 35, 40 degrees out, it can probably survive up to 3 weeks, And in a hot North Dakota summer day, if it's getting hit by UV, it might be toast within a day. So it's all based on the water user and understanding the risks and knowing the procedures he needs to take when exiting the zebra mussel infested water. And the thing behind these aquatic nuisance species, once established in a lot of these waters, guys, you're not going to eliminate them. So once you open the box in a lot of locations, you're not getting it back. There are very few successful examples of zebra mussel eradications. Lots of those are in quarry type systems that are 10 acres big, and the price tag that goes with some of that is like in the $500,000 range for 10 acres, So it's not cheap. It's very expensive. And in most cases, it's eradication at this time. It's not an option. And the sad truth is, too, I just mentioned, 5, 10 species here, and there are many, many more on our radar that we are looking at as potential threats to, our waters here in North Dakota and as the United States, just in general. So to recap in general about aquatic nuisance species and how it can affect Devil's Lake and other lakes in the region, can really impede the recreation in a lake. We talked about how fly and rush make it difficult for shore anglers. Zebra mussels are definitely can cut up feet on the bottom of there, and people aren't going to swim in areas because they will litter the shoreline with their Asian clam. Same thing, litter the shoreline, make cut up little kids' feet. In some areas, it's been shown that AIS can lower property value. So you have a cabin year after year on Minnesota, and your Asian water milfoil introduction happens, and that localized bay that you had your cabin on, you know, it's completely vegetation choked every year, and the property value drops with that because everyone knows that that bay come June, July, August ain't going to be usable in a lot of locations. And a big one here for Dracinid mussels and others, it can really damage water infrastructure. You know, millions upon millions of dollars are spent mitigating risk in hydroelectric power plants for irrigation. And just in the Great Lakes alone, it's like $200 million in that region to mitigate AIS risks. It can also lower tourism within the region. There's been various studies that shown that people, you know, avoid lakes, or they ask, you know, would you go to this lake if it had zebra mussels? And we've heard it too. I don't go to that Twin Lake anymore because it has zebra mussels. I don't go to blah 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 because I don't want to deal with the mussels. So there are some people that, you know, won't go to that water body, and it could definitely potentially lower tourism value and affect the water body. Decrease biodiversity, decrease healthy fish and wildlife populations. So now I've talked a little bit about the species. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the vectors of introduction with aquatic nuisance species. How are they introduced to new waters? You know, where's the risk coming from, and so on. So unfortunately, there are very, very many different species, and there's very, very many different vectors. You know, earlier this year, we learned of a new vector. March came around, and Grant and I got a notification that zebra mussels are being sold at pet stores on mossballs. And we're like, the heck's a mossball, you know? So we had to scramble and contact over 130 different stores saying, do you have mossballs? Pull them off your shelves, quit selling them, you know, and get these destroyed, basically. So you always see there's new pathways out there and risk factors. There's water guarding, natural events, docks and lifts, and these are some of the biggest ones for Devil's Lake. I'll get into here in a second, and watercraft. A big one that we deal with a ton at North Dakota Game and Fish is high-risk commercial equipment, and this doesn't, as you know, it doesn't pertain to this region as much. It's more the western North Dakota, but occasionally we have this where because of oil activity, because of other things going on, they're bringing in large commercial equipment for some kind of project they're doing on the river where they need tugboats and barges and things like this. A lot of this equipment is coming from Great Lakes states or the Missouri River or the Mississippi that has been moored in water bodies for a long time. And Grant and I, you know, earlier this year, we dealt with a boat where they said, you know, pressure wash the crap out of it, good to go. You know, we walked back there and what do we pull, 150 mussels off of it, and then had to re-decon it again, and then sit there and pick out mussels for like 2 hours. It was just awful. So they're definitely high risk because they spend a lot of time in the water, got a ton of surface area, and are often moored in infested water bodies. In the U.S., it quickly became apparent in the early 2000s that, hey, what is one of the highest risk vectors for spreading aquatic nuisance species? It's trailer watercraft, because we live in an interconnected world where people are moving and vacationing all over, using water bodies. And so it quickly in the 2000s, watercraft inspection and decon programs started to pop up around the United States, primarily in the Western United States. Since then, this uniform protocols and standards has been released quite oftenly and is a living document and constantly changed. This is what North Dakota follows for watercraft inspections, and So does every other our Western state uses these minimum protocols for inspecting and decomming boats. So looking at Devil's Lake risk factors specifically, you know, docks and lifts are a big one, and they're a growing one here on Devil's Lake. You know, we last year did a project where we're sending out brochures to 300 plus property owners around the lake that had docks and lifts that we could identify on GIS and some other mapping services, and sent out that notification. But every year the lake's getting more and more developed. There's more and more equipment coming in. There's more docks and lifts being brought in. There's more water intakes and things like that. And if people are getting a lot of this equipment, they get it used from areas in Minnesota, Wisconsin, bring it to North Dakota, and if they're not taking proper procedures, that dock and lift could have sat in Minnesota infested lake for 2-3 months. It's going to have zebra mussels if it's in an infested lake. We brought it over to North Dakota, dumped in the water, and there's your source population of zebra mussels for starting. So it's a very, very big vector. Another one is trailer watercraft. Devil's Lake, you guys all know this, we have very, very high non-resident usage. Primarily, that non-resident usage is coming from areas that have quite a few aquatic nuisance species. It's just a fact. So that has some inherent risk. And then, you know, sometimes we're a little quick to point to figure out the non-residents, but there's a ton of residents here in Devil's Lake that will go fish Minnesota and come back and fish it the next day too. That does happen. There's quite a bit of diversity and recreation among our local anglers here in North Dakota, where they're on infested water body the day before and we see them have the access or something like that. So it does happen. And overall, there's a lot of watercraft, and this is part of the thing that as an AIS community, we're working with boat manufacturers. Boats are getting more and more high risk. You know, we don't have a lot of those single hull duck boats out there fishing anymore. You know, a lot of these boats hold a ton of water, have nooks and crannies that are hard for inspectors to get at. You know, our wakeboard boats can hold 50 plus liters of water while they're trailered, go to a new water body, you know, dump that water in a new location and start a new AIS population. So it's becoming harder and harder for Western state agencies to inspect a lot of these houseboats and a lot of the bigger boats, to the point where they're saying in a lot of locations, you know, you bring a houseboat, don't matter, it's sitting there for 90 days. We're not letting them along. So here, quick, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but here's a map of the Devil's Lake watercraft traffic from this year, and I'll zoom in. But you guys get traffic from all the way here in Arizona. We inspected people from their home state of origin, to Florida, to North Carolina, and you can see that throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, there are a ton of people coming to Devil's Lake here. And I'll zoom in here. So here you can see this comes from last year's inspection total, or this year's inspection totals. A little over, how many do we do? 2,037 inspections on Devil's Lake. You can see these are our big locations. These are ND residents that we're inspecting, but there's a ton of people from all over Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa that have, you know, an increased likelihood of having aquatic nuisance species as their last stop before coming to Devil's Lake. So this is our 6th year of watercraft inspections on Devil's Lake for North Dakota Game and Fish Department. From 2017 to 2021, we've done 4,535 watercraft inspections here on Devil's Lake. You know, we just got new funding here in 2019, so we were able to increase our watercraft inspection effort here in 2020, 2021. Grant and I plan to continue to grow that effort on the lake over these next few years. But we're going to run into some challenges, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff too. So this is just some inspection data that we've had over the last 5 years of our incoming watercraft. So this was over 3,000 watercraft that we inspected that were incoming to Devil's Lake. You know, 13.4% were deemed dirty or wet. So they either had mud attached somewhere to that watercraft, had a bunch of residual water in the transom, or some other location, or just were on unclean boat. 4.6% were carrying vegetation, so they had vegetation on their bunks, trailers, motors before trying to launch in Devil's Lake. 1.6% had significant residual water, so in live wells or ballast tanks or something like that, there was a significant amount of water. And then here's another one that's concerning, just because boats that are moored in zebra mussel infested waters or with ANS carry a higher risk of spreading ANS. So 2.4% of the boats that came to Devil's Lake in the last 5 years were moored in another location in Minnesota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, or other location before coming to Devil's Lake. And we don't know the precautions that they took before then. We just know that they were moored in some water body before then. And then we quickly estimated in the last 5 years what percent of boats were coming from zebra mussel infested water bodies as their last stop before coming to Devil's Lake. And this is probably an underestimate because we didn't go through 600 lakes and check their current status, but an estimated 6% of all boats were on zebra mussel infested waters before coming to Devil's Lake, immediately before.
So are you saying that 22% of the incoming boats that were tested were not clean?
No,
add them all up, you have 13.4.
No. See, these two are, this 1.6 falls within dirty or wet. So dirt, we kind of separate dirty and wet a little bit as, someone might have been driving down the road and caked on mud on the side of their boat before coming to Devil's Lake, and there might not be as big as risk factors. So we just say that, hey, they launched unclean. We don't know where that mud came from. They just weren't a clean boat. And then this vegetation is separate from this 13.4%. So I'm going to talk about some of our North Dakota game and fish efforts. And for us, it's really been, over these last couple of years, a collaboration with a lot of different partners. Like I mentioned, we got that new funding and we've been growing our program here. So I'll highlight some of our efforts here. So on the education side, we really deployed kind of a complex outreach campaign. We just jumped into the digital marketing side of things this year. We ran a ANS digital marketing campaign that generated 7.6 million impressions, which resulted in over 20,000 clicks onto our ANS website. So that was very encouraging. Through that digital marketing campaign, we actually target ramps. So I'll target Graham's Island, I'll target 6 Mile and say, hey, the people that last visited these locations or in the last 3 years, send them targeted ads via cell phone on Facebook or some other service and get them to see our clean, drain, dry message. So it's great because in the last 3 years, I can pull up anglers that haven't even been here in the last 2 years and say, hey, I'm going to target you with ANS education material. So if you come back, you know what to expect here. We got back here from COVID to increase our personal contacts. Grant and I were doing kids fishing events this summer. We did Lenten Dairy Days, we did Earth Day, we did numerous wildlife presentations talking about it, trying to get that person-to-person contact and show that, hey, this is an important issue. We all care about our resource here, and we want to preserve our resource for the future generations of North Dakota. So we did a bunch of different stuff for person-to-person contact. A lot of our inspectors, they'll be out there teaching people on the ramp side about aquatic nuisance species. They get a ton of questions and they mark off on lists. Hey, I talked about Asian carp today. Hey, I talked about this. So it's really good to get a lot of those personal contacts, because for me, a lot of that personal contact goes more of a way than you getting an ad sent at you on your phone too. So, and we also do a ton of different stuff: radio, television, print advertisements. And you can see here, this is just our dock and lift brochure, which can be found back there. Some of the print advertisement we do. Outreach biologists go on radio and often give ANS updates, reminding the steps to take to clean, drain, dry, and things like that. And then partners play a crucial role, you know, for aquatic nuisance species awareness. I think a lot of times partners or people get drowned out from hearing it from North Dakota Game and Fish, but when they're hearing a similar message from, you know, the Ag Commission or Water Commission or Friends of Lake Skakawea or Dakota Anglers or, you know, Devil's Lake, it really sets in. So partners play a crucial role. We've been working with partners this past, you know, few years to help get out the aquatic nuisance species message. Earlier this year, we had our first Aquatic Nuisance Species Awareness Week signed by the governor, and it was great because we released press releases from, you know, a wide variety of North Dakota state agencies. Partners had videos. Federal agencies participated, and overall good experience that I hope to build on. So monitoring's a crucial part on the fight on ANS. You know, when you're on a water body, you probably want to know, am I on a positive water body? What's out there? What do I have to be worried about? North Dakota Game and Fish, as a department, we inspect over 200 waters for aquatic nuisance species a year. So this includes both our ANS staff efforts, fisheries staff. They're doing some kind of aquatic nuisance species check, whether it be plankton toes for zebra mussels, vegetation checks. We do snorkeling checks, part of their day-to-day fisheries operations. On Devil's Lake specifically, Grant I or some of our guys are out there monthly doing plankton toe net monitoring for zebra mussels. We do snorkeling in the summer, looking for hard substrate along a lot of our major access sites, by marinas, things like that. I know Todd and his fisheries guys are out on Devil's Lake all the time, looking for just any aquatic nuisance species that they might cross paths with. So on the prevention side, we've really increased our watercraft inspection presence over the last few years. I think, you know, 4 years ago, we had 2 seasonal watercraft inspectors for the whole state. We're moving up. I think this year we had, you know, over 17 individuals participate in watercraft inspections. I know that the guys on Devil's Lake, if you fish Devil's Lake, you probably at some point and you fished it off and ran across some of our North Dakota Game and Fish inspectors. We're deploying new prevention devices. Here's a CD3 system that we put at Malreman. It's one of our zebra mussel infested water body, and it's used to help them lower the risk of their watercraft. So when they exit Malreman, they have their boat clean, drain, dry, and hopefully it lowers the risk of spreading it to new waters. We put out that eyelid, which is a virtual inspection device at Graham's Island. So every time, you know, you drive by that thing, it's barking some kind of ANS message at you. It's also taking a video. So if we have someone drive by with a skirt of vegetation on that before they launch, that video can be replayed. It gets flagged and it gets sent to us where we can forward it to a game warden to take action. And then game wardens, along with our inspection efforts here, so as a state, we inspected 5,365 inspections this year. They also lead, and this doesn't count, game warden-led roadside checks. So in the summertime, they'll do roadside checks during the 4th of July on I-94 or other locations to make sure people are in compliance. Do random checks where all watercraft must pull over, make sure they're in compliance with their ANS regulations. So some challenges we're facing. A lot of this is just in general for the ANS community. We're really dealing with a new boating demographic. I think the COVID surge, we have a lot of first-time boat owners out there on the landscape that have never heard anything about ANS, that we've seen have trouble, you know, even backing down boats down ramps and all kinds of different stuff. But reteaching a lot of people and educating them about ANS is definitely going to be a challenge, and it's a challenge that we're seeing nationally across the region. Boats are becoming more complex, but you know, nationally we work with boat manufacturers and forward suggestions to increasing compliance with boats, making it easier to inspect boats. There's just more and more complex boats coming to Devil's Lake than ever before. Every year there's probably more wakeboard boats than the year before, or more jet skis and all that. It's just a fact of life. Another big one is finding and retaining watercraft inspectors. You know, we put out job announcements here, and they go out to all our major colleges. They go out to a lot of local communities. They're posted on our website. But I can honestly say in the last 3-4 years, we've never had an inspector from Devil's Lake. You know, we always have to bring in people outside of Devil's Lake that are 3-month guys that need to go back to college, or we have to find housing for them, and it's always a challenge in the spring communicating with Todd. Todd, what do you have for housing? You know, how long can they be at the college? When do they have to be out by? Where do we house them between then? And you guys know the housing market is tough here. So finding and retaining that, we're also looking for some just local guys that would be interested, because it would save us on time. We spent a lot of time this year having to haul people up on slow periods from Jamestown and Valley City so they could be up here inspecting boats on Devil's Lake. And just in general, some of this housing supervision and inspector logistics. Grant and I are the full-time ANS guys. We're running the watercraft inspection crews. We're doing a lot of that education stuff, working with their education stuff, or committee, and doing a lot of our monitoring stuff. So it's a full-time job with the housing supervision inspector logistics, and we're looking at creative solutions, whether it be working with local partners somehow to possibly take on some of this supervision and just inspection logistics. So this is my last slide, and then feel free to ask some questions. Protecting Devil's Lake from the future. A big thing is user buy-in. You know, you can have the best prevention systems in the world, but if you have uneducated people that don't care, it doesn't matter, because you know, you could be open watercraft inspections from 12 hours a day, and it only takes one guy that doesn't care or isn't educated to dump his boat in to ruin a resource for a lot of people. So ultimately, people in this room, I really want to preach that, we hold people accountable, and that we have a lot of user buy-in from our anglers on Devil's Lake and our water recreationists and stakeholders around the lake. Devil's Lake, it's a big lake with how many accesses, Grant? 10 accesses. 10 accesses, got a ton of stakeholders. Protecting a lake like this, it's not possible without the collaboration of a bunch of stakeholders out there, because we could be inspecting every boat. Well, we couldn't be, but if you inspected every boat on there and someone put a dock and lift in too, it's something that you might not account for. So you got to have wide collaboration among stakeholders to, hopefully keep our lake clean for a long time. Questions?
Do you have enough money now? I know with the new stickers and the watercraft permits or whatever.
Sure.
On an annual basis now for non-residents, did that help your funding?
Oh, it tremendously helped our funding. It's allowed us to do a lot of our efforts that we're currently doing. We couldn't have our number of inspectors. We couldn't be using these prevention devices. We plan to spread them onto Devil's Lake and Lake Skockwee and other areas without that funding. So, we're constantly working through the challenges of, having the money and also spending it responsibly too, because we got two guys here running a program. We're maximizing our resources right now, and there's still federal funding that we could go after here in the near future that, wouldn't require anything from legislature or whatever that we could potentially tap into. But some of our limiting factors are finding people out there, finding, clubs to work with us, doing that kind of stuff. So, and finding housing, logistics like that. North Dakota Game and Fish, we can't pay for housing, and we can't, some of that with inspectors and things like that. So money's not all the time our limiting factor. In this case, right now, it's not.
I think you need to make a list of exactly what you need, and then ask us as partners how to help you.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. The big one right now is finding applicants, and just like everyone at Devil's Lake, finding people to go out there and inspect boats on the ramp side, because that's part of our prevention goals. Devil's Lake is a prevention lake where we're trying to get as much eyes on watercraft going into Devil's Lake as possible, before it hits the water. But to find the local people to do that stuff, and when you send people from Jamestown, they work a 10-hour day and they drive 3 hours in the day. Not great. So.
What are you paying for an inspector? Is that the limiting factor? Or
No, we bumped up our pay from, John, do you remember what it is? It's $12 to $17 an hour, depending on experience. And bumped up from last year. And I don't think it increased our applicant pool that drastically, having that pay bump from last year. Maybe 10 applicants total.
As far as AIS inspections,
Sure.
is that just suggested, or is there some kind of
No, and North
legal matters that we could take?
Sure. No, right now in North Dakota, it's a voluntary system. Saying that, we have a very high cooperation rate from the general public. About 95% of the people that we ask cooperate with us. On Devil's Lake, I want to say we probably had our lowest cooperation at times. And a lot of that wasn't the Minnesota guys, it was our local North Dakota guys who say, no, I don't want to do that, but it also sets not a very good example for others. So. But in locations too, if it were mandatory at Grams Island and things like that, I don't know how a lot of our anglers would take to delay in launching more than it already is. Because if we found a mussel foul boat, it could be a long delay before you get to launch in that location too. So something to keep in mind. A lot of guys, they say, hey, no, it's all time, money. We're on the water, or we're off the water. That happens too.
Well, how does Montana do theirs then? I fish
Sure.
for fish a lot.
Sure.
How do they do theirs? Will we have to be inspected and have the
Yep.
documents in our boat?
Yep. They have a seal system along their major road access ways, and they also have some lake systems. Montana Game and Fish, they have over 400 seasonal employees working for them. But they're also having the same problems as we are, where, hey, we can't find staff to manage these locations anymore. And so they bring a lot of partners in to run watercraft inspection stations. In certain areas, they'll work with tribal or conservation districts, and those conservation districts will actually run their watercraft inspection stations, because Montana Fish, Wildlife Parks couldn't possibly hire those people. They don't have those ins to those local communities to grab people either.
And they're working with a lot more money.
Yeah, true. Fact.
How many boats were inspected that were in violation, they were given warnings?
That question you'd have to ask Scott Winkleman, who heads enforcement. So could definitely get you in contact and ask him that question. Because our inspectors are not law enforcement. They can find a violation and report it to a game warden, and that's where our chain of command basically is. Sure. Yeah. No. Definitely voice.
If he was in violation, he just.
Yep. Definitely voice your concerns to our chief game warden.
Yeah, they have those numbers. I got them numbers here a while ago.
Yep. Yeah, I can't remember how many. This year we had more than last year. A lot of our we're still having trouble with our AIS sticker. People making sure they buy it. I know just our inspectors reminded 400 or 500 boaters this year to purchase their non-resident AIS sticker. It's still a problem that's out there.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the fact that they'll just bypass it. The cost for the sticker is X dollars. The fine is only $35.
Sure.
And they're just going to say, well, I'll just risk it. I won't, maybe I'll get checked, and maybe I won't. $35 is nothing. And that's the problem I see, that the fine is not near what it should be.
And I know game wardens started nailing guys this year for AIS stickers. It was kind of a slow last year, whereas like friendly reminder, this year they really issued quite a few.
You know, so you found a number of boats that were fouled.
Yep.
So those are just the ones you found.
Yep. No.
That means that there has already been a number of boats that
Oh.
have been in the lake.
Oh yeah. No. If you looked in your crystal ball, you'd probably be disgusted about how many boats hit the water at Devil's Lake or other areas of North Dakota with something on their watercraft. You know, you can't inspect every boat's out there. And, you know, we're dealing with a small subsample, and we found boats like that. There are more out, you know, that we're not catching.
That's just a question. Have you ever, because we know it more than likely has happened.
Sure.
Is there anything unique about the lake? The reason why it hasn't come fouled yet?
You know, we talk about this too. Devil's Lake, from our other locations in North Dakota, has a little bit higher salinity than other locations, but based on risk assessment data done by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it still has available habitat within the lake conducive to zebra mussel colonization. And that's true for most of all of North Dakota waters. They're very conducive to just citizens being able to habit those waters.
Have you done tests to show that it does happen?
That they
Take a lake sample and put zebra mussel.
yeah, that's the hard part is they're not easy to keep alive actually in the lake once they get introduced. In an aquaculture facility, it's actually way tougher to keep them alive. We put zebra mussels in aquariums and stuff like that, and they're dying left and right, you know. So, and just in general, that's part of their reproductive strategy, right? So they're reproducing millions upon millions of zebra mussels. Their mortality rate, especially when they're veligers, is very, very high. So a lot of those guys are dying quick, and we see a ton of death and mortality in their first year.
I guess I would say that it's not a matter of why, but when.
It could be, yeah. But there's lots of good. Also, this isn't a new problem in a lot of areas. So in Arizona and Nevada, they've had quagga mussel infested water bodies, major ones, Lake Havasu, Lake Mead, Lake Mead, Havasu, Mead, that have quagga mussels that they've been battling with for the last 20 years. And so far, they haven't had any new introductions from that source population in other waters in their state. So there are overall some successes.
Ben, can you talk a little bit about the risks to our hatcheries?
Yeah, it's a major risk. Just in general, the zebra mussel population over there has really compromised our ability to produce fish at Valley City National Fish Hatchery and stock our lakes with it. So production there this year didn't happen. So basically all our fish are coming from Garrison Dam National Fish Hatchery, and that's covering our requests, and we're actually going to be down on requests and being able to fill those requests coming up over these next few years. So the zebra mussels, just like everyone else is affected by them, we're affected with them in our hatchery system. We're going to have to spend to upgrade some of our hatchery liners and spend money in those locations to make sure that it's much more safe for producing fish underneath those conditions and mitigate risks at the hatchery in those locations.
So give me an example. What happens if you get zebra mussels at the hatchery out west?
And at Garrison?
Yeah, where are you gonna go to restock North Dakota?
So we would have to adapt our hatchery our operations at Garrison Dam. So this would mean we have to, and we've talked about some of this, having to fill ponds earlier in the year, only use line ponds before zebra mussel veligers are reproduced, and then have only makeup water from earlier in the year to function those ponds, which would definitely decrease overall fish production, not being able to put new fresh water on them. And then we'd have to upgrade our UV filters, upgrade our mechanical drum filters to keep veligers out. It'd be a constant recurring theme where we're gonna have to, go into piping, clean it out, and do that. And there's a big price tag attached to that. So, you know, it could greatly compromise a lot of our, and it has the valley too, our ability to grow fish and stock lakes. That's good.
I know Montana was gonna try to eradicate and not eradicate, use a chemical herbicide on one bay and one lake this year. Do we know, was that successful for them?
Sure, I think they've been doing a bunch of different stuff with Eurasian water milfoil over the last 5 years. Yeah. And I haven't heard if that was successful or not. They've tried in the past and been unsuccessful. I don't know if this particular example was successful. They also have Asian clams in like a local community lake that they're now drawing down the lake and gonna eradicate and kill off those golden clams that we're talking about over here. And we've done that in the past too, where we had Eurasian water milfoil in Dead Cold Creek, and we drained down the whole lake and froze it out and killed off everything in there.
Awesome.
Yeah. And damages your resource there too.
When you surveyed homeowners around the lake, like here in North Dakota, we don't have lake associations such as they have in Minnesota or Wisconsin and other places. Have you surveyed, I know when you inspect boats at
Sure.
lakes, you do a little survey, question,
Yep.
answer.
Usually,
How
it's done for
familiar are you with?
Yep.
But what about residents who live around the lake?
No, I don't think that we have, to be honest. Not that I know. We might have in the past, but not within the last three years. And a lot of it's for us is hard to get access to that, you know, phone numbers and stuff to survey and send surveys to a lot of those people that aren't hunters and anglers and contributing to North Dakota Game and Fish Fund.
Awareness by voters?
It's you know, it's been high compared to 5-10 years ago, probably. But this year I think was probably a little bit of a dip from the year before. Just in general, like I said, we have new boaters out there. You know, there was one time on Devil's Lake where I wasn't a happy camper either, where Grant was putting in an eyelid, and we had some resident guys pull in there. I helped someone inspect boats, and we had 4 guys in water violations in a row, live well full of fish or live wells full up, planning to launch, you know, in Devil's Lake. So Grant heard me rant in the car about that for a while, or plugs in and things like that.
Bait's still an issue coming in North Dakota?
In some locations, especially down in south and Dahlgren's district, right? Yeah, lot of bait is brought over from South Dakota into those lakes down there country. It does happen over here in Devil's Lake. Obviously, people bring in leeches. And we've had numerous tournaments on the Red River this year where guys have coolers of live bait that they brought from Minnesota that we say, you can't use that stuff. So yeah, there is risk out there with that too.
Yeah. And I think the knowledge of disposing of those is still an issue, I would say. Too.
Yep. And especially their zebra mussel infested waters, we're constantly reminding people that, you know, you're not allowed to take water away from the lake anymore. So, you know, you have your minnow bucket, you got to drain your minnow bucket before you're moving to the lake, and a lot of people are still, you know, getting that reminder.
I know when I first went to Ramsey County Commission, I spoke to them as trying to develop a joint effort between Nelson County, Benson County, and Ramsey County, because to just do a single effort here in Ramsey County when you're still connected on the lake, it just made sense that all 3 counties work together. And of course, all counties are strapped financially. But it really, like I say, it doesn't pay to start an effort in Devil's Lake when Benson County is not going to have.
And keep in mind that there's probably some simple avenues that we're not thinking about where we could get education material out, where stakeholders could, you know, have free ad space and put education material. And it might not be, you know, the most prevention strategy, but it could help educate people around the lake and people coming to Devil's Lake. And if you change you know, a couple guys' attitudes towards ANS or an ad or whatever could make a difference.
I know that Minnesota did a survey and they talked about the trust levels, and anglers had a high trust level of DNR, where lake owners and lake owner associations were stronger with the person who's just a resident on
Sure.
board. And there was different methods that they surveyed in Minnesota, identifying that a lake owner would prefer to receive a communication via one method, where an angler prefers to receive his messages during a
Sure.
different method.
And that's definitely true, because we have a hard time reaching, you know, the water sports wakeboard community, because they're not buying fishing and they're not actively fishing and part of hunting and stuff. So it's hard for us to get ANS education material in front of them. It's hard for us to get in front of cabin owners sometimes, you know, to the point where we've resulted in some locations of just handing it out door to door at cabin locations, you know.
Personnel? Do we have enough?
You know, we're gonna grow, again, probably next year, which means that Grant and I are gonna take on more seasonals and get already 5, 6, 7 phone calls on Sunday, increase that, but we're willing to do that. And we're, planning to do some things here in the works with Corps of Engineers, possibly on Skakawea and other locations where we're delegating some of this work and having outside organizations help us with inspections.
What about on the state level?
As far as that
Full-time employees like yourself.
that's above me. So.
Other questions, suggestions, comments? As you can see, it's a big, big problem. Love to just give it to Ben and say, take care of it for us. But I think, as you can see, it's gonna take a collaborative effort to prevent this from coming into our waterways any further than it already has. You know, it's in the Red River, zebra mussels are. And these tubes are an example of how it spreads, and from 2 months, 4 months, and 6 months, that end one. So you can see how that would impact intakes on a water line or anything like that. So Ben, I think, did a fantastic job presenting the information. Maybe we can, you know, it was all live on YouTube. Steve, do we have any idea how many people were watching?
2 to 3.
Okay, about as many as in the room here? No, I am, you know, I want to thank everybody that came tonight, that have an interest in this. It's gonna take a monumental effort to keep this at bay. But every little bit that we can do individually, as a group, whether it be a county commission, a city commission, North Dakota legislature, Department of Game and Fish, I think we need to come together and help one another out to help prevent this. And I think it would have a major impact. And a healthy body of water, we could probably survive the introduction of one aquatic invasive species. But as you can see from Ben's presentation, there's several of them out there that are knocking at our door, and they're impossible to eradicate once they're here. So we don't want any of them in our waters. And so if we can keep them all at bay, that would be the best opportunity to keep our waters as thriving as they currently are. You know, we have a wonderful recreational area here. We have a wonderful tourism area here. We have a wonderful fishery here. Other questions, comments? Rich?
This is for Dave. When we talk about it, we have one entity here, but when we look at invasive species across North Dakota, we know that the agriculture department is dealing with the superweed, which is now, in 14 counties identified in the state. We also know that the forestry department has their invasive species that they deal with. Game and Fish has the aquatic, agriculture. How can legislatures pull all these entities together on a broader scale so there's more funding and focus? And I fought for years already that the gas tax that recreationists put into their boats, and that tax winds up going to DOT, and those dollars are spent on highways and bridges and not on aquatics. So how can we, as local citizens, get to legislatures to pull all these groups together?
One of the things I noticed this past legislative session, I'm not appropriations, so we do a budget. When I was chairman of the committee that dealt with the game and fish, the subcommittee. And, you know, I don't know if the attitude of leadership there is changing, but, you know, this last year or so, they're pretty pleased and satisfied. Leadership was pretty pleased and satisfied with how the effort was going. You know, they didn't seem to have a driving need or want to push it harder. So you need to buy in at that level. You know, it's great to have us all concerned about it. I'm sitting here thinking, well, how do I get people to be more responsive? You know, do we need to raffle off a fishing boat, hunting boat, guns? You know, and if you do the inspection, you get one chance at prize. If you actually let somebody inspect your boat before you put it in the water, and when it comes out, you get another chance at the prize. But, you know, I don't necessarily like that idea, but it's an incentive that people might consider rather than say, screw that, I'm just getting my boat.
So Wyoming does that. Wyoming does that already. When you go through the state, get inspected, you get a ticket. That's your chance at a prize.
Well, and you could carry it farther. You could have businesses, you know, if you come in and you can show me that you bought the extra tag for your boat and paid the fee, and you know, you get a discount on something. Somehow we have to figure out a way to make this a positive thing instead of making it a negative. And you know, I agree, we probably need to have more people out there, but every place I go, they're all looking for more people too. They're struggling to find it. Happy Jewels and Fargo went out of business. They can't get help. When I went there a few weeks ago, they weren't open Mondays and Tuesdays. They were only open Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and only from this hour to that hour. And they happened to go there at the right time. There's like 2 people running the whole thing, and they only have drive-through. And they used to have 2 stores, one in North Fargo, one in South Fargo, and they both were very successful. You know, but it ain't happening anymore because it isn't that they can't pay the wages; it's that there's nobody wanting to work.
Why would they want to work? You write them a check not to work.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This all the
All of
COVID,
us have worked all through COVID, never got a dime.
all this COVID stuff has not been a good thing for the country.
Ben, did you have anything else?
I don't know if I helped do anything other than I will talk, but certainly open to possibilities that, trying to do things, but, you know, you have to have game and fish and the ag department getting together to seeing eye to eye on some things and everybody else.
Well, I think it goes a long ways beyond the game and fish, ag department, you know, add in their Department of Transportation, Economic Development, Recreation, Tourism, hospitality industries. You know, I think they all can be affected by, you know, our waterways becoming infested with an aquatic nuisance. So I think all those departments coming together, as well as us individuals coming together and educating the hell out of this thing and trying to combat it the best we can, and all working together at a common ground, you know, preventing this from coming into our state. You know, you look at what some of the other states are doing, and, you know, Minnesota, they have the land of 10,000 lakes, but they have a lot of lake owner associations, and some of them police their own lakes and have hired committees or hired individuals to monitor every boat coming in and out of their lakes. Other lakes you go to though, in the same state, not a darn thing they're doing to check you. And you go over to Montana and they have, you know, a lot more stricter enforcement of every boat coming in. You know, you look at that graph that I had up here earlier, and they inspected 110,000 watercraft this past year. That's a lot of inspections, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of resources involved in that.
I'm sure that's where the money comes from.
And Colorado did 400,000. Yeah.
Well, Jeff, you said it. Key ingredient of that's education. And education, from my perspective, starts with young people. I can tell you that I've had people come up to me because over the years, since 1990, I would take my big Newfoundland dogs into schools and talk to classrooms and talk about water safety. And every once in a while, I'd have a parent come up to me and say, "God damn it, just because your dog thinks it's a good idea that everyone should wear a life jacket in the boat, I have to start wearing my life jacket." I said, "Well, Jesus, I'm really sorry." But the same thing happened with seatbelts before it was a big law. I remember my kids going, "Dad, do I have your seatbelt on?" You got to be a better example. So if you can get the education at the right level, and it's the same is true for hunter safety. Everything works better if people are not ignorant, you know. And sometimes you get people that are ignorant and arrogant at the same time, and that's recipe for disaster. But if you can keep them informed and help them understand, and probably education of young people is the best thing we can do, or one of the best things.
So is there just two of you that the entire full-time AIS staff?
Yeah, dedicated to just AIS efforts.
That's
And then fish, and just in general, North Dakota Game and Fish, you know, we're a small agency.
Right.
So we got, for fisheries and stuff, I think we're like 47th or 48th in the entire United States for staff. So in general, we're a small agency.
it's pretty startling. You have two people on what is probably the biggest challenge or biggest threat. I mean, I know that's not your.
Yeah.
Thank you for the effort you guys do. It's amazing. Well, I think none of us here are going to reinvent the wheel. But I think we need to look at professionals and say, give us a list of what we need. Give us some action points, and let's see if we can get. We just don't know which way to go. I mean, give us a roadmap of success.
Like a lot of right now, I don't know how you can, if we can somehow get into local communities and you can push people my way for getting applicants and that, because we spend a lot of time just on the winter time. How are we going to house people? Where are we going to pull people from? Things like that. When, you know, Devil's Lake's not a tiny community, we could probably get local people to work out on ramps for us and do that kind of stuff. ramp locations, housing, stuff like that. It's something that you guys could help us figure out and would really help what we're trying to do out there on Devil's Lake. And there's lots of, opportunities, whether it's, Jeff and Rich want to hold some kind of event or whatever, we can be there supporting, bringing education material. If you want to do a kids camp or something like that, we can be there to provide that kind of stuff. We did Jeopardy with kids this year and all kinds of stuff. So we're here to support your local efforts too, for aquatic nuisance species.
It seems like locally though, even within the state parks and game and fish, we've talked before about Grand Island State Park, how busy it is. When you go there, you have to get a permit to get in. And if they're issuing a permit to inspect the boat, seems like you're already there. It should be a pretty simple, straightforward thing to do. But they don't do it. There's a disconnect there, and it's another state agency. It seems like somehow there should be money that would be available to the Parks and Rec to have their staff that they probably already have, or have other, another staff or something. Just there, hey, when you give them the permit to come into this park, make sure you inspect their boats. How to, right? Is that part of the roadmap? It seems like, we hear it's the busiest state park that we have. There's a lot of out-of-state boats there. It seems pretty simple, but it's not. There's something there that needs to happen.
Possibly.
I ran that route, and there is a lot of disconnect between agencies. There's not, I won't say a unwillingness to work together, but they just don't. DOT didn't want to work with game and fish. And I'm talking to them about losing money. They got very defensive.
Ben, this graph behind you here, this is from Montana's inspection site, their dashboard. Should that be of concern? That last water launch?
Yeah, we followed up with that one, and what happened was that was a boat that had come from the Great Lakes 7-8 years ago, and it had been moored in, moored in the Great Lakes, came to Skakawea, sat and had been in Riverdale, and then it was sold to someone, and while it was in transit, Montana found some bisel threads and found an old remnant of a zebra mussel shell, and when they touched it, it turned to ash, basically. And then so they flagged us down right away and said, hey, we just had a boat that was last on Skakawea, and found this remnant of a zebra mussel shell on it. What's going on? So this fall, basically, Grant and I were out taking samples. We had game and fish staff basically look at every dock, lift, and every shoreline that's now basically exposed on Skakawea, get all walk shorelines and that, and never found any mussels after that. So we're thinking that one's a remnant from the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, yeah, it shows that those high-risk boats are hitting our waters at times.
Right, and a lot of them, the scary fact is that they're passing through our state.
Sure.
And
a big problem right now too, I guess, is it doesn't show how many are commercially hauled across our state either. So they're put on semis, and they're usually big houseboats that come from the Great Lakes and go through North Dakota and don't stop. So it's tough to know how many of those boats actually come through North Dakota, stop at a lake here, and fish there, and pose an actual risk to our waters. I don't know. But we're in, whenever a situation like that happens, I get a phone call from Tom Wolf, and we investigate, or vice versa.
Ben's one of those very committed young men, and 4th of July weekend.
Yeah, well,
you want to talk about that a little bit?
It just it seems like every holiday weekend that I have, there's something new to come up. So I think it was this last 4th of July, I got a call and said, hey, we've got zebra mussels on Lake Lemoore. So I had to wrap up what I was doing on 4th of July, drive down to Lake Lemoore, confirm zebra mussels, get the press releases. This year it was the opposite. It was Twin Lakes. So I had to cut my, I think it was Labor Day short, drive to Twin Lakes, spent Labor Day swimming in Twin Lake trying to find zebra mussels, which is actually not easy. It's probably the earliest we've detected one in a lake, but found some adult mussels. We collected zebra mussel veliger toes from June, and we just hadn't processed those samples yet. Looked in there and we found veligers indicating a reproducing population within Twin Lake. And the same thing happened in Lake Elsie. I think it was another holiday weekend. Called Lake Elsie. Guy just removed his dock. Go down there and investigate.
Swimming, diving, 8 hours.
Yep. Yeah, Grant and I are based statewide, so Grant's, we've had multiple 16, 17-hour days, and in the summer we put a lot of miles on our trucks.
That's why these guys in this position are young and energetic. I almost hate to ask, but Lynn, would you care to add anything? Lynn was your predecessor.
Yep.
About 3 predecessors ago, I think. So
Department's looking at the right method. We've got to have the money to fund people, get people out there. We've also got to identify, I stressed that years ago, identify the likely sources, target them repeatedly with same message, different presentation, and you guys are starting to do that.
Yeah.
Going to what I call national media. The magazine, North Dakota magazine's nice, but you're not getting out of state with that. And that's where the problem's coming, is out of state, so.
Yeah, and you look at the water bodies that we've had infested so far, and there's a lot of recreation on that. So you can see that docks and lifts could be a problem, and then also, boats that probably have sit moored in other locations and then come to North Dakota. Usually in a lot of our water bodies, like fishing Devil's Lake, you're on 3-4 hours a day and then you're off. So those boats are at lower risk. And we started to do some things that Lynn's talking to, where we're actually looking at our watercraft inspection data, finding out where high-risk boats of origin are coming from, where's their last water body, and then using digital marketing or other sources in that area to target those specific people at boat ramps. So when they go home, hey, they're still getting notifications from North Dakota Game and Fish about aquatic nuisance species on your phone or whatever. So starting to evolve our methods, and North Dakota Game and Fish, we're getting a marketer position. So Grant and I really look forward to working with our marketer, because we are not communication specialists, and that's going to be a great partnership, having a full-time marketer on our staff. Yeah. Yeah.
We don't want to dissuade our out-of-state residents from, out-of-state people from coming in. We want to welcome them in. We just want to educate them before they get here.
And there are a lot of guys from North Dakota that go to Minnesota, spend the weekend, and come back. So
yeah.
it's not that just that either. Like I said, Grant and I, some of the toughest people that we deal with at boat ramps that are in the worst violations are ND residents. That's probably what we've seen. That's just a fact. So.
But I'm still stuck on the point of voluntary. Like I said, we run up to Montana. If I remember right, what was the number? 110,000 inspections.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's $55, if I remember right, for us to get inspected. That's $5.5 million. There's your money.
And every boat coming across Montana line, whether it's a kayak or a motor propelled boat, needs to be inspected.
Yep. Mr. Brown?
I think these two gentlemen should be commended on all they have to do. Based on, you're playing just a small army. He needs more help.
Well, and that's my point. With that $5 million, that pays for a lot of salaries.
Answer this question. Would it pay for, the Devil Lake area, for the county, the city, the pool money, to hire more help for you, or have our own in this area? Or would
I
it be
think,
better served if we put it in the wash station?
well,
Which one?
the thing about the wash stations, and we went back and forth, so what we're doing right now is we're putting people out there on the landscape to encounter those high-risk boats, so that when we encounter them, we can use our wash station that we have, mobile decon unit, our facility, our game and fish shop, send them there, get decontaminated and clean. If we put out that public wash station that's free to use, you know, how many guys from Minnesota or North Dakota residents that come back are gonna use that wash stations before they go into the lake voluntarily? You know, they're not most likely, and they're gonna use them going out, so
So we need our own enforcement,
for,
our own way.
you know, that has caused problems too in the past with all kinds of different stuff. Oh, no, yeah, because I don't know, there's just been disconnect, and you can look in Minnesota between the county, the DNR, the multiple organizations that have all their little watercraft inspection crews where everyone's doing their own thing, and
No, we could be
Yeah.
under you, should be under you.
yeah, and that's some of the things we're looking at is part of that, where we're looking at, hey, can we work with a local club or something to contract out work, where we potentially would provide a grant, you guys would hire the people, manage them, we would provide training and things like that, and we're looking into that, but some of it has to do with just in general what our attorney general's rules is for contracting out work. So we're looking into that this year too. It's looking at, hey, can we contract out work like Montana does to a conservation district out west to run the watercraft inspection crew to help us out so that we don't have to manage it. Yeah, it's something that we're definitely looking at.
You know, it is, these guys have to walk kind of a fine line across the board. It reminds me of, years ago when I first got in the legislature, the chief of the highway patrol was talking through one of my committees. And somebody said, well, God, we've got to do something about all these deaths on the highways and all this drinking and all this, that, and the other thing. And he said, I can solve the problem. I can get the death rate and accident rate on the roads in North Dakota down to almost nothing. He said, all I have to do is you have to post the speed limit of max 55 on every roadway and allow us to give tickets for any violation over 57 miles an hour. He said, that'll do it. But it won't be socially acceptable, you know? So to say, you know, hammer it, using the hammer all the time just is not going to work. We have to coordinate that with the education we talked a little bit about, maybe some other mild incentive things. We don't probably have to give boats and guns away, but, you know, the communities to buy in and help support it too and get the word out better. And we can all do that. You know, I think it can be meaningful.
Well, once people understand that it's their own best interest, if they want to come back and enjoy that lake, that they're as equally as involved as the rest of us are. You know, once you get that too, they become a volunteer instead of, you know, an offender. So I don't know how you get that through, but. And I think you guys have done a good job with education. I think we need to take it another level. I mean, I think that all the obvious people have gotten with your message. I think it's all the people that we need. There's a lot of people that are not reaching that message yet.
And
we can
it's
do that.
hard to reach these people too, in
Yeah.
some circumstances. It's what every state agency is dealing with, some of those user groups, it's just hard for North Dakota Game and Fish or whoever, Idaho Fish and Game, or whatever, to reach those
Right.
certain demographics of water users.
I think your market person can help.
I think so. Yeah, that's definitely gonna help.
Money well spent.
Yeah.
I would think that, nobody wants to see more regulation. I think everyone can agree on that. But whether it's politically unsavory or whatever reason, once it happens here, then the game is pretty much over. So I would think that you would want to if you have a mean dog and it's gonna, you know, it bites people, well, you do something about it before it bites them. Let's do something. It's like it bites people.
Susie, you have anything to add? You're a great communicator, you know, a great advocate for our region, our area, our state. And you're a great marketing mind as well. So any insight, thoughts?
No, I think that they hit the nail on the head tonight by saying, you know, the more help you can get in that department, the better. You know, like boots on the ground. We definitely think having that marketing person for game and fish will help. I think there is a lack of education out there, especially towards our non-residents. But it's not just on the ANS side. I was in Jamestown for a different meeting for game and fish this morning, and the same topic came up about educating people. So I think it's very important, and I think we have a great community that works together. And as far as us pushing the message out, the better. We just put an ad in our visitor guide that will be out probably in 2 weeks to talk about units and stuff. So just whatever we can do.
Education. You know, one of the things that Lynn brought, and I don't know if I should thank Lynn or hit him over the head for inviting me into this whole ANS topic years and years and years ago, but he got me involved in it and rather passionate about it, and so I don't know if I should thank him or hit him, but one of the really, I thought, ingenious ideas that Lynn had was having utility companies put a reminder, a flyer within all their billings. You know, because it's going to affect everybody that flips on a light switch. You know, if all of a sudden those cooling intakes are clogged and blocked with zebra mussels or other aquatic vegetation that have to be cleaned out on a regular basis, that's going to add to your utility bill, and everybody's affected then. You know, because those utility companies aren't going to eat that cost and smile and grin and bear it. They're going to pass that on to the consumers. So, you know, everybody should be involved in this because it's going to take everybody's effort to combat it.
Feel free to reach out to Grant and I. We're always willing to help and provide material or, you know, talk about ANS anytime. So feel free to reach out. Can give out my number if anyone's interested, and feel free to hit us up.
We know how to contact him. He knows how to contact us. If you need to get in touch with them and want Ben's number, just reach out and get a hold of me. I can pass that on to you, his contact information, all online as well. They'll make that available. A lot of brochures in the back and other marketing material. Please feel free to take some of that, pass it along. You know, I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. It shows involvement within our community and a community that cares about what happens to our waterways. So, thank you. Anything else before we wrap up tonight? It's been a long day, long night. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank Ben, Grant, and Todd, North Dakota Game and Fish. It is Todd, right? Yeah, I thought so. I want to thank Senator Elke for being here. I want to thank Commissioner Brown and Commissioner Lightbon. Thank you guys so much. Question in the back?
I just want to let people know, I don't know if they're aware, the really attracted by a CD3 system to be doing.
Yeah, a CD3 system at the Spirit Lake Marina, correct?
Yep.
Yep, and that'll be up and operational.
Probably this spring. We got it mid-October, so we figured we were putting in.
It's another way to help maintain clean water, watercraft coming and going from our lake. So I want to thank Spirit Lake Nation for taking that on and promoting that. And that's a product that's made right in Minnesota. They're distributing them all over the country, and I know Ben have one in, is it Ashtabula?
Ashtabula, 2 on the Red River, and one at Metagoshi right now because they have curly feet. So.
Yeah, so, hey, another way to combat, so,
Those are free and open use to the public. So.
yep, so. Anything else? With that, thank you all for coming and attending.